Good afternoon, everybody, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Placing Children and Young People at the Heart of Delivering Quality Speech and Language Therapy. My name is Kamini Gadhok, and I'm Chief Executive here at the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, and I will be chairing this afternoon's webinar. I'd like to introduce you to the presenters. We have Morag, Dorward, who's chair of the RCSLT Strategy for Children's Services Steering Group and is also Children, Young People and AHP lead for NHS Tayside. Morag will speak and will then pass the presentation over to Lorna Baxter, who is the Professional Guidance Manager at the RCSLT. The webinar itself is 45 minutes long and we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end of the presentations. So let me just talk you through a little bit of the housekeeping so you know how to engage. In terms of interacting, you will see only your name and the name of the panelists in the list of participants. However, please be aware that there are many others who will be online, and at the moment we have 57 people who've actually joined us, but we have 120 people registered. So we look forward to having you all come on the journey with us today. If you want to send a message, you can do so by using the chat button. Particularly if you have any difficulties with anything hearing, then maybe Kaylee will try and support you in that. However, if you want to send questions, please do so by using the Q&A button on the webinar software. You can submit a question anytime, and we will try and answer as many as we can at the end of the webinar of the Q&A session. Please do address Q&A questions to all participants so all of them can see the questions you've asked. And finally, if you want to use Twitter, do join the conversation using #RCSLTwebinar. The webinar, as I've said, has been recorded and will go online with the slides after the event. When we finish the webinar, we do hope that you will fill in a survey which will pop up at the end, and that will also link into a post-event email. Okay, so moving on to the learning objectives. I'm not going to go through these in detail as you can read them on the screen, but we hope by the end of the webinar that there are a number of things that you will feel that you have more information about, and also hopefully feel empowered to go forward with some of the ideas that you've heard from our speakers. I would now like to introduce Morag to start the presentation. Over to you, Morag.
Thank you, Kamini, and hello everybody. I'm Morag Dorward, and I have had the privilege of chairing this steering group. I'm happy to be sharing our learning and thoughts with you today. We live in a changing world across the UK, and we have been proactive at RCSLT in responding to these changes. In recent times, RCSLT and members have been involved in developing BERCO 10 years on, of which many of you will be familiar. The Scottish Government Action Plan to break the intergenerational cycle of poverty is very near to publication, so do watch this space for more information. The guidance document we're talking about today is supported by a range of position statements, as you see listed here. I encourage you to look at these too if you're not familiar with them already. The strategy, the children's strategy, is a two-pronged approach. We have a new document to replace the existing Children's Services Position Statement, and this has principles and theory of change with additional service activities for you within that, and I hope that many of you had a chance to look at it before you joined the webinar today. We also have a focus on outcomes and participation outcomes within that level too. In addition, we have a digital home for children's services related materials too now, and this will make the strategy interactive and practical, and will link you to other areas in the website that are relevant to you, particularly the clinical and professional guidance areas, the evidence-based scenarios, practice-based scenarios, evidence and research, relevant policy contexts and updates, and external resources and good practice examples. And Lorna Baxter is going to take you through some of them later on in this webinar. So why did we need the guidance? We recognised that this would be a more valuable piece of work if we included the voices of children and families and other professionals. And we're going to give more examples of that in future slides. But I wanted just to point out that we recognise that the changes had taken place since the publication of the last position paper in 2006, and also that we needed to provide leadership in meetings and the needs of the children and young people and professionals. And members who are working in the changing world were asking for more guidance too. So all of these were reasons why we produced the guidance, as well as some of the statistics that you see in front of you here. So we've been on a journey. This slide shows a high-level direction of travel, which I'm going to expand on in the future slides as we go. As you can see from this diagram, the online conversation helped us to engage with the members, families and partners, which took us well over a year to complete. Some of you will have been part of that conversation. This diagram shows the high engagement we had from a range of stakeholders, and some of you may be on the webinar today with us, and you're very welcome. You can see the numbers and range of people on this slide. So we began to build a theory of change by starting to think, why are we here? As people who care for others, what is our purpose? We framed this from the perspective of the child and young person rather than a service, using the output from the first online conversation, looking at life outcomes at the start. This slide shows how we then built this into activities that individual speech and language therapists would carry out, leading to specific communication and participation outcomes and ultimate life outcomes. We recognised that it was also important to think about the activities at a service level and link these two with the communication outcomes in the examples below here. The steering group then worked with the data from the online conversations to look at key themes. We began to realise that these worked well as a set of principles by which we would all work. As you can see, these remain with the child and young person at the centre, and we're going to look at the detail of this in another slide later on in this presentation. We were very keen today to share with you about practical examples from the guidance, because actually we have the guidance, but so what? How will we use it? What will we want to do now? It's just to share you with these examples, but please remember with all these examples that this is very early days and all the examples are not fully worked up yet. I will talk to them all in the next slides, but meantime, I want you to call all of you to action. On registration, some of you have sent through the ways in which you're using the guidance now, and Lorna will pick up on this later in the webinar. But do let us know how you're using it, and we can share this on the new website so we can build a bank of ideas and practice that others can refer to and use. And I'd like to thank those who've given us the following examples that I'm about to share with you. So the first one is an example of clinical practice. And this is one thank you to Hackney. The context here is a little girl called Isabel, who's 2 years, 5 months, and she attends a Hackney walk-in session. Referral due to concerns was made, and she had developmental delay, family history of learning difficulties, autism and hearing difficulties. She had few words and difficulty following one-step commands, and it was identified that she may have eating and drinking difficulties when she started nursery. So the clinician started to consider and to develop communication and participation outcomes for us, think about what outcomes they wanted, and to link that then to the speech and language therapy activities that you see in front of you here, and then reviewed progress. So this is about developing a personal plan for the child, but with the consideration then of the progress made and linking that to the communication and participation outcomes that come from the guidance. So that's a lovely clinical example for you. The next one here is about encouraging the service user's voice. This one comes from London North West Healthcare. And the idea in this one is that they have an annual questionnaire that they do for service users, and have decided now to use the 12 communication and participation outcomes to develop questions for their annual service user survey. We have examples that are from schools and secondary pupils in addition to this, which you can look at, that can be downloaded after the webinar, but at the moment the one in front of you is as an example of questions to parents. And so they focused in on the communication and participation outcome of my family understands my needs and is equipped to support my speech language communication, eating and drinking and social skills development. And asked the question of parents, is the speech and language therapy support provided helping you to support your child's speech, language and communication needs at home? Is the written information provided useful? And are you involved in agreeing outcomes and targets set to support your child's speech, language and communication needs? And so on. So they're using these now as a way of getting the user's voice heard. The next example I wanted to show you is at a different level. This is about strategic commissioning. And this is something that happens across the UK in one form or another. The example that I'm going to share with you comes from NHS Orkney. Thank you, Orkney. And this is an example of a very draft, they want me to tell you, framework that they're beginning to look at with their education colleagues for their service level agreement. And this one is about really coming to terms with, well, what is it we do, being able to communicate that well with the education department, and also developing a reporting mechanism. So if I draw you to the very right-hand column, this is a local one if you want, and they're beginning to make decisions about what are we actually reporting on and how can we measure that. But what they've done then is, if we go from right to left, they've looked at the outcome indicators as the ones they've decided, well, actually the communication and participation outcomes that are within the guidance would be ideal for this. And so they have put them into that one as their outcome indicators, and then thought about actually looking at all the activities from the guidance in the one in the middle column there. I'm very aware that you're not able to see this in detail, but if I can say to you that most of these are a cut and paste from the guidance, and that this framework will be available to you after the webinar in a way that you can see it. So then linking it back into the life outcomes, again, that come from the guidance. And by doing this and then using, on this occasion, what actually were the national outcomes of getting it right for every child on the left there, the Orkney staff were able to work with the education department to really describe their service, what they were going to be doing in it, and what the outcome could look like and how they could measure that. So, work in progress. The last one I want to share with you is about, very emergent, about ideas for developing a quality framework. And this is where we come back to the guiding principles that I referred to earlier on. And the next slide shows these in a bit more detail in a different way. But for this one, the idea here is that we could, as services, start to think about the principles here And it may be then 1 year you might want to look at access in your service, and actually then the levels we have here about addressing barriers to access, prioritising early intervention, and so on, could be things that you would want to look at in a little bit more detail and actually reflect on as a service to see how you're getting on with them, see what kind of quality you think you're delivering. So again, emerging, very keen to hear your ideas of what you think may happen from this one or how you could use that. So a roundup then to say that I've just taken you through a journey of how we got here and giving you a bit of an appetite for how we can make this guidance live and work for you. And very, very keen to work with you to develop this further. But it now gives me great pleasure to hand over to Lorna Baxter, who's our Professional Guidance Manager at RCSLT, to take you through the next section. Thank you.
Thank you, Morag, and good afternoon. I'm Lorna Baxter, the Professional Guidance Manager at the RCSLT. As you're hopefully all aware, the RCSLT launched a brand new website at the end of last year. We're aware that it can take a while to get used to the new layout and structure and the information that's now available. And today I'm going to talk to you about the Children's Services Digital Hub specifically. I'd like to explain a little about the information available on this section of the website and hopefully help familiarise you with this area. And I'd like to stress that we're still gathering and developing content for these pages, but we're keen to share our ambitions for this digital hub. So this area of the website is split into public pages, which are accessible to the general public. And there's also some pages which are only for RCSLT members with further information. On these pages, you'll find guidance, learning pages, evidence, an influencing section, and also some contacts which might be useful. To access these pages, if you're not a member, you need to click on Menu and then select Speech and Language Therapy, Where SLTs Work, and finally Children's Services. If you are a member and you're logged into the website, you can choose Menu, Guidance, Settings, and Children's Services. So firstly, the public pages of this Children's Services section provide information for non-RCSLT members on the role of speech and language therapy for children and young people. The members of the Children's Services Steering Group were quite keen that the guidance document that Morag has been discussing was made available to the public. We think that it's a useful and relevant document for non-members, perhaps professionals who work with children and young people in other areas. And as well as the guidance, there are other resources available to download, such as RCSLT fact sheets, resources from the BERCO 10 Years on Review, and links to other useful external organisations. Then in the members section, we have first of all the guidance area of these pages. And this contains a range of professional guidance for our members working with children and young people. We do think that there will be resources here which will also be relevant to our members working with adults. So please do have a look at this area and see what might be useful. As well as the guidance document, other examples of resources available are position statements on relevant topics, case studies and examples of best practice. These usually align with one of the guiding principles from the guidance. External guidelines from other organisations, and the pages also set out the policy context for services working with children and young people in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Next, we have a learning section. This area contains resources which will help to implement the guiding principles. This area is quite important for members to help with their CPD, so do have a look here. You'll be able to access tools and frameworks which may be useful for clinical practice, learning resources, practice-based scenarios, case studies, and relevant webinars, and any other external resources. We also have an evidence section of these pages where you'll be able to find evidence and research resources such as systematic reviews, journal articles, research impact case studies, and research priorities. And finally, we have the influencing section of these pages. Here you'll find information to help you to influence local decision makers and budget holders, to raise awareness of the role of speech and language therapy, and specifically to demonstrate the value of the service and hopefully help develop your own leadership skills. So having gone through the different sections of this Children's Services Digital Hub, we'd like to stress that these pages really are for you, and we want them to be as useful and helpful as possible. We're aware that they're not perfect and there's still a lot of development that we need to do. We're very grateful for all the resources that have been sent in to us and suggestions of best practice that we've received. If anyone has any other ideas about these web pages, please do get in touch. The idea is that this digital hub will continue to evolve to reflect the changing needs of our members working with children and young people. Finally, we'll be running some workshops to help you make best use of the guidance. So do watch this space for further information. And thank you to everyone who's provided suggestions and ideas about what would be most useful for you. If there's anything else that you think of or anything that you haven't yet told us, then please do get in touch with me at lorna.baxter@rcslt.org. Thank you very much, and I'll now hand over to Kamini, who will explain a little bit about the next webinar.
Thank you so much to both Morag and to Lorna for their presentations. We're just going to give you a bit of a highlight on the next webinar, which will be a follow-up from the one that you've heard today. So it's going to be held on Wednesday, the 20th of March from 1 to 1:45. And we're very happy to say that Mrunal Sizoda, who's co-chair of the National Network of Parent Carer Forums in England, is going to be talking about the importance of engaging parents, carers and children, young people themselves in supporting. I think what we've been pushing for is a very much a co-production of both strategy for service development and delivery, and also obviously for supporting engagement in co-producing care plans for children that are individual to meet their needs. So that's going to be really interesting to hear from him, and also from Glenn Carter, who's Head of Speech and Language Therapy in NHS Forth Valley, who has actually been really working hard to implement some of this change in approach in Scotland, well, based on some of the direction of travel that's happening from Scottish Government that I think Morag mentioned earlier. So that's going to be really exciting. So we're very happy to have that opportunity in March. And as Lorna said, the ability to have workshops to actually engage with our members, and we're hoping that in those workshops we might also help be supported through involvement through parents and carers. So we're really keen to hear from you if you've got any ideas around that, and we will be looking to work with you all in supporting their delivery. I have to say that there's another webinar which may not be of relevance to everybody who's online today, but in case it is for any of your colleagues, we've got a webinar on IDSI which will be taking place on the 13th of February, and it's at a different time, it's at 3:30. So coming back to today's webinar, we have had a couple of questions. One of them was about how the voluntary sector can support statutory speech and language therapy services. So Morag, if I could just turn to you and just see if you can give us an idea or an example of what you've been doing locally. Thank you.
Okay, it's a jolly good question, because I think we are trying to co-produce and work with all partners, and I think voluntary sector have a very important part to play for the families that we have of children with speech language communication needs, as well as our adults services. So one that comes to my mind just now is a local one for me in Tayside, and we have an organisation, a voluntary organisation called Parent to Parent, and we do a lot of work with them and linking with them. Their reason for being really is to support the social and emotional side of parents' needs in relation to children with when they have a child with additional support needs. And one example that I think I'd quite like to share then is how we have a complex needs pathway locally, and Parent to Parent, this voluntary organisation, are part of that. And so a child, once they have a diagnosis, goes straight to parent, and they work with the family to really help them through that social and emotional time, and helping them come to terms with the diagnosis, and really helping them to be in a position to support them to co-produce with us in the development of the child's care plan and its implementation. So I think for me that's a very helpful example locally, and I'm sure there are loads of others that people would have and are in their heads as they're listening to us. But voluntary sector, hugely important. Thank you.
Thank you, Morag. And as Morag said, we're sure that many of you will have some excellent examples. So please do send in your case studies, because it's only by having those that we can help support sharing of good practice. And Lorna mentioned before that the website is still being developed in terms of the content. So we're really looking forward to hearing from you. We also had a number of questions about engaging children and parents in terms of decision making, and some of the elements of the questions we've asked are quite complex in nature, and we think it'd be more appropriate to respond to one in particular by in writing after this webinar, because we do need to make sure that we get our facts right. So I think those were the main questions that have come in. Okay, so I think we've come to the end of today's webinar, and just want to thank all the people who've joined us, and hopefully you found that useful, and we look forward to involving you in the workshops. And if you're interested in helping us with running the workshops, we will be putting out a call, but again, do let Lorna know, because it'd be useful to get a sense of who is out there and is interested in running the workshops with us. So thank you again for listening, and I'll say goodbye.